Ahora sí, hola, muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a todas las personas que nos acompañan hoy en este tercer coloquio del Doctorado en Ciencias del Desarrollo y Psicopatología. Bueno, el día de hoy tenemos a un invitado llamado Gianluca Exposito que nos va a acompañar el día de hoy. Y bueno, estos coloquios son una serie de actividades que se enmarcan dentro del ámbito de la formación y difusión de nuestro programa. Aquí tenemos diferentes investigadores que conforman parte de nuestro claustro y que a su vez traen una serie de invitados para que compartan su experiencia en investigación dentro del área. El día de hoy le corresponde a la línea de investigación de familia, parentalidad y desarrollo y tenemos a la doctora Carola Pérez que nos trajo un invitado de esa temática. Para aquellos que estén en esta sesión y les interese postular a nuestro programa, les informo que vamos a abrir postulaciones a finales del mes de julio y les dejo en la pantalla mi correo electrónico por si les interesa contactarme, reunir más información, preparar su postulación. ¿Ya? Bueno, sin más preámbulo, yo los dejo con la doctora Carola Pérez y el doctor Gianluca Esposito.
Eh, buenos días en Chile, buonasera, no, buenas tardes en Italia, ¿sí? Am, para mí es un inmenso placer tener a Gianluca Esposito como invitado en esta actividad de coloquio del doctorado de la universidad, porque contamos vamos a escuchar una excelente presentación. Yo cada vez que he escuchado a Gianluca en otros espacios, cuando nos ha presentado su trabajo en nuestros congresos, disfruto cómo él es capaz de presentar en forma tan amigable y comprensiva la investigación que él ha desarrollado de punta en el tema del coloquio de hoy. Tengo que presentar algunas cualidades. Bueno, decir Gianluca Esposito, él es psicólogo clínico del desarrollo. Me encanta ese concepto de psicólogo clínico del desarrollo, es decir, un psicólogo clínico que tiene una mirada al desarrollo y tiene una larga trayectoria en investigación del desarrollo sociocognitivo infantil, pero incorporando al estudio más tradicional que nosotros conocemos, los aspectos más de la electrofisiología y la neuroimagen. em, También al incorporar electrofisiología y neuroimagen en sus estudios, esto com- complejiza, por supuesto, los análisis y el cómo acceder o cómo cuantificar esta información, y por lo tanto ha utilizado modelos de datos complejos para desarrollar investigación, ¿no? Y ha estudiado comparativamente el desarrollo y la interacción social, comparando como patologías que involucran dificultad o deficiencia en la interrelación con otros versus el desarrollo normal. ¿Ya? Dice, su presentación de su página dice, ha aplicado protocolos genéticos, conductuales y neuroimagen en el contexto del desarrollo sociocognitivo infantil, comparando trayectorias típicas y atípicas. ¿Mm? Además, dice, ha explorado la interacción entre cuidador y bebé en distintas situaciones experimentales, que ahí vamos a ver algunas por lo que vi en la presentación. Vamos a ver algunas situaciones experimentales que creativamente han desarrollado y cómo a nivel de no solo desarrollar este modelo experimental, sino que toda la medición que han implementado, ¿ya? Y por supuesto esto se ha traducido en una serie de publicaciones y colaboraciones a nivel mundial, en Europa, también en países que hablan lenguajes muy raros, ¿no? Como Singapur, Japón, lenguaje que nos queda un poco lejos. Así que me es muy grato dejarlos, no le voy a quitar más tiempo a Gianluca, dejarlos invitados a su presentación. Las preguntas las tienen que ir escribiendo donde dice preguntas y respuestas, y después de la presentación, a no ser que Gianluca nos diga lo contrario, vamos a hacer la apertura para las preguntas y respuestas. El micrófono es todo tuyo.
Muchas gracias, Carona, por la introducción. Yo estoy estudiando español, pero soy muy tímido. Por este motivo, farò mi presentación en inglés, ma preparai le diapositivas en español. So, perdóname si tú ves errores en las diapositivas. Uso con estudiantes, si tengan preguntas, pueden preguntar en español o en inglés o en italiano. Uh, so let's switch to English and let's share my screen. Video. You should be able to see my screen in full screen, right?
Yes, we can
Okay,
see.
so perfect, thank you. I will present, as Carolina was saying before, some of my study on attachment, where we try to use multiple levels of study, trying to integrate like this very basic and important phenomenon in social interaction. And my main lab is at the University of Trento in Italy, although very recently I also joined for a joint position at the University of Hertfordshire in United Kingdom. And we that are interested in development, in Desarrollo, we know that it's very, very important to study the early interaction, because the early interaction are really the basic of the future development, and they can shape the social, the cognitive, and dyadic relationship later in life. But also we should say that when we're studying two brains that interact, especially if the brain of a baby interacting with his parents, this is a very complex phenomenon. And in order to study this complex phenomenon, we need to use a multi-level technique. And that's exactly what we do in my lab. We try to use different levels of analysis spanning from EEG, FNIRS, fMRI, that are measuring the central nervous system functioning, as well as measuring the peripheral nervous system, like, for example, measuring autonomic nervous system, as well as the DNA. And genetic assessment. And the idea is that if we combine all this information that comes from this different level, we can truly try to answer some of the fundamental question in social interaction and in developmental psychology. So I would try during this talk to present different questions that I consider very important. And I consider them very important because I think they are at the basis of the development of the brain. As a species, we are a social species. So we interact with the external world. And in order to interact with the world, we need a brain that functions in a specific way. And our brain is shaped from very early on to the interaction with the environment, and especially to the interaction with the caregiver. So the kind of key questions that I want to try to answer this late morning for you and early evening for me is, does the mother automatically respond to the baby? And conversely, does the baby automatically respond to the mother? And if mother and baby automatically respond to each other, is there any way we can assess synchrony between the functioning of the brain in the mother or father and the child? And furthermore, as Canoa was saying, I define myself as a clinical developmental psychologist because I'm interested in also in the clinical application. So I'm interested in see how some clinical condition, for example, stress or anxiety, can affect parents' synchrony with their child. And finally, I will try to see from a more theoretical and methodological point of view, if it's possible to kind of measure the synchrony and what are the best strategies to study synchrony. So let me see if I can get rid of this from here. Okay, so one of the main kind of study that we are conducting focused on a very specific situation where there is an interaction between the mother and the child. And this interaction is when the baby is crying. So we are interested in what happens when the baby is crying and what are the responses of the caregiver. And I may do this little game of asking you what's like the most common response to a baby cry around the world when a baby is crying. And actually, we did this study that was published a few years ago. And then this was a study that was essentially studying children that were 5 months old in their home when they were with their mother. And this study was conducted in different countries around the world. And in all the countries, what we did was we placed a video camera and we were recording the activity for an hour. During this hour, many things were happening. But then later on, we collected the material and then we analyzed all these areas, all these hours long recording. And we were interested in seeing what was happening when a baby was crying. Well, when a baby was crying, in all the countries that we analyzed, the most performed action to calm a baby cry was to hold the baby and start working. And we found that we thought that this was kind of interesting because if you see a similar behavior in very different parts of the world where you have like very different level of education, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, it means that probably there is like some biological basis behind this behavior. And for this reason, we did an fMRI study. So as probably many of you are familiar with, the fMRI is a technique that allows us to study the activation of the brain and of specific part of the brain during some specific task. And in this first study, we analyze 22 early new mothers. So those are new mothers of very small kids. And we let them listen to different kind of cries. And what happened was that specifically when these participants were listening to baby cry, there was an activation of the pre-supplemental motor area. And we submitted this study to a journal, to the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science. And it was very interesting because the editor told us that, okay, you are showing us that there is a specific model response in mothers from different parts of the world. And then from the brain part, you are showing data from Italy. So maybe those are not really informative enough. So they essentially ask us to replicate the study in another country. And that's essentially what we did. We replicated the study in North America, in the United States. And also in the United States, with a similar symbol, we found out that when new mothers were listening to episode of crying, they automatically activated the supplemental motor area. So the supplemental motor area is this area that is activated anytime that you are beginning to do an action. So we submitted our study, and again, the editor told us, okay, but you are showing us this effect in Italy and North America, so it's mainly on Caucasian population. Let's see if something happened also if you include different ethnic group. So we replicated the study also in Shanghai, in China, and what we found was that again, we found an activation of supplemental motor area. So for us, this meant that anytime that a new parent listens to an episode of crying, there is some automatic preparation to the motor response. But automatic preparation to motor response may mean many different things. May mean that the parents are getting ready to move and do something, or may also mean that the parents are getting ready to say something, because also when you are saying something, you are preparing the muscle in your face, adapting your face and getting ready to speak. So we did a study using TMS, and so we had a TMS stimulation of the supplemental motor area, and at the same time we were studying the evoked motor potential. So essentially we were measuring the activity of some specific muscle, and some of these muscles were located in the arms. And the participants were exposed to different sounds. Among these sounds, there were also baby cry. And what we found was that our participants were both male and female, and they were listening to natural cry and other sound. Among these other sounds, we also had like different kind of cry that were essentially changed in their frequency. So this was a cry sound switched to a frequency that was like 400 hertz higher. No? But then what happened was that when we showed the natural cry, only for the female participant, there was like a strong response about 100 milliseconds after the offset of the cry. So the offset of the small cry script that we perform. So essentially what is showing here is that there are like some specific muscle in the arms that when they hear a baby cry, they get ready to do something. At the same using the same kind of rationale behind the study, we did other MRI studies, but this time we were focusing on the default mode network. The default mode network is a network which is activated sometimes when your brain goes away. So essentially, when you are not focusing on your task, but you focus on something else, I learned this morning that in Spanish, the translation should be like divagación mental. So essentially, anytime that you're doing something which is unrelated to your task, you activate this network in the brain, which is called default mode network. And contrary to what some people can expect, this activation of the default mode network is very important, because this gives us some degree of freedom of being switched off from our task. And this is very important for our survival, because as a species, we need to be disengaged quite easily from what we're doing. Otherwise, if we were stuck all the time on the same task, it would be very, very easy for predators to attack us. And in this study, what we did was we put people, both female and male, in an fMRI scanner, and we make them listen different sounds. Among these different sounds, there was also some baby cry. And what we found was that only for the baby cry and only for the female participant, there was a strong deactivation of the default mode network areas when listening to the baby cry. So in other words, if we ask people to do and think whatever they want. Then when there is, and we play them different sounds, only when they listen to the cry sounds, they activate the default mode network and focus their attention. So in other words, it's like saying that the female participant in the study, when listening to baby cry, they were focusing their attention on the cry. And the same thing did not happen for males. And then a very similar study was replicated like a few years later. And in this second study, we were still working on the default mode network, but essentially we were giving the participants specific tasks. So instead of passive listening, they were either working on a self-oriented task. So for example, we were asking participants to answer question about themselves. And we know that if you are answering question about yourself, you increase your default mode network activity. So for example, we were asking people to answer question that were like, I am a person, and there was like different adjective, like curious or active. And people were responding yes or no. And we know that during this task, there is increase of the default mode network. And also we had another task that was goal-oriented. We know that the goal-oriented task, on the other hand, decreased the activity of the DMN. So if you are doing something that requires a lot of your attention, you essentially decrease the DMN. So for example, in this case, they were counting the number of syllabes of some adjectives, and they had to decide the number of the adjectives. So essentially what we found was that again, in the female, measuring the percentage of the board change in some areas of the default network, you have a decrease, so a deactivation only for the female participant. And this is again an example of how you have like differential response in male and female to the baby cry, but mostly these responses are automatic, so cannot be really controlled by the participant. Then some other study that were done in our lab we're mostly focusing on something that I consider very important when you're studying developmental science, especially when you're studying development, which is the interaction between genetic and environment. And oops, sorry. And in this study, we were focusing on the interaction between genetic and environment, and we were focusing specifically a very important genetic marker of social interaction, which is related to the transporter of the oxytocin. And so our model was like this. We were studying like an individual. And from this individual, we were collecting genetic information about the oxytocin responder gene. And at the same time, we were collecting information about their view of attachment. We were using like the maternal bonding instrument, and we were measuring the memory the person had of when he or she was a child about care and overprotection by their parents. And these participants were exposed to baby cry and other different sounds. And at the same time, we were measuring some measure of the physiological activation of the specifically targeting the autonomic nervous system. And the two proxy that we analyzed were the heart rate variability and temperatura nasal, the temperature on the tip of the nose, which is a very good proxy of the parasympathetic nervous system. And here, what we found was that something that we consider very, very interesting, because essentially we found a modulation of genetic bioenvironment to the physiological response to the cry. And to explain you a little bit better these results, let me tell you that when it comes to the oxytocin receptor gene, and you are focusing on a single nucleotide polymorphism, essentially you have two expressions of the gene. In one expression, you have like two bases that are G, and this is what it's considered like sort of protective factor somehow. Also, the other expression is when you have like a basis. In this case, we call this like A carriers. And essentially, A carriers are the ones that are most susceptible to the environment. Indeed, what we found was that if you have like an A carrier in the oxytocin transporter gene, and you are immersed in a bad environment, which means you have no maternal care or high maternal overprotection, essentially what you show is like you show some not so nice physiological responses that are usually related to physiological distress. But on the other hand, if you are in a good environment and you have like the A carrier, what you show is this pattern of more physiological calmness. And then let me switch you to and present you some data that we're conducting on animal model. So I can introduce also some of our animal model. And so, for example, in this study that was conducted by Hashimoto et al. In 2001, they were studying rats, and they were studying how listening to a baby cry can produce, can have an effect on milk production on maternal rats. And in this experiment that I found, that I consider very, very elegant, what they did like a rat mother with some pups in their plastic cage, and then outside of the cage, they put like they isolated one of the pup, and they put some ice in an ice bag close to the pup. Essentially, the pup, when is close to the ice, he starts screaming and crying. So in one condition, there was like a microphone amplifying the crying so the mother could hear. In another condition, the pup was out, was crying, but there was no microphone, so the mother could not hear the baby cry. And then in a third condition, essentially the pup was not was isolated, but it was not really possible for the mother neither to see nor to listen to the baby cry. And then what they did during the study was that they were measuring the level of prolactin at the plasma level in the mother, and also they were measuring the maternal surge. And so what they showed was that only to the mother that were exposed to the ultrasound vocalization, so that were able to listen the baby cry or the pup cry, they had like an increase in the plasma prolactin level. So essentially they were producing more milk, and they were doing more maternal search. So they were searching more for their pup. But what happened in the human? We can say, okay, that's something that happened in the mouse, but it's something that can happen also in human. So we try to do like a similar experiment where we use near-infrared spectroscopy on mothers of 4 months old, and we place the electrodes, well, the diodes or the near-infrared spectroscopy on the maternal breast, and we made the mothers listening to different sounds. And among these sounds, we also had like baby cry. An important thing that we did in this study, this was a study conducted at the University of Nagasaki, because at that time, the University of Nagasaki was one of the few places in the world where you could do this kind of experiment, because we were able to record the audible part of the cry, but also the ultrasound component with a very, very high spectrum. And also we had, like, at the University of Nagasaki, some microphone that were allowing us to show and to make the participant listen to both the audible and the ultrasound component. And essentially what we found was that for the full spectrum, so when we had, like, the audible and non-audible component, there was a very strong increase of the oxygenation level on the breast. Of course, we cannot be sure that a higher level of oxygenation means more milk production, but considering that for ethical reason you have no other way to study the human milk production, we can assume that the oxygenated level in proximity of the breast is a good proxy of maternal milk production. So I think so far I convinced you about the first question, whether or not the mother responded automatically to the baby. Now let's see if baby respond automatically to their parents. And for this year, I want to show you some experiments that were conducted about 10 years ago when I was still living and working in Japan. And in this experiment, what we did was that we were taking young kids from 0 to 6 months of age, and we were doing this experiment with their mother. So the mother were asked either to hold the baby and move around, or to carry the baby while holding. And I will show you here a short video, but what I want you to keep in mind is that from now on, anytime that I will present, like, the blue color, I'm referring to the holding condition. Whereas anytime that I'm presenting you the red color, I'm presenting the carrying position. And also in the video, please pay attention to the bottom part. In the bottom part, there is, like, the heart IBI. The heart IBI can be considered like a proxy of relaxation, because IBI stands for inter-beat interval, which is the interval between one beat and the next. And you can imagine that the longer is this interval, the calmer is the baby. The shorter is this interval, the less calm is the baby. And here is the video. So the baby is crying, then he starts moving. And as you can see, it comes down, and the IBI drastically increases. And also you can see that the baby is moaning us. And now the mother is sitting down. And now again, the mother moves and the baby relaxes. Also notice when the baby is crying, is also kicking and moving. So there is a lot of voluntary movement, a lot of cry when it's not moving. And if you look, like, at the plot on the left side, you will see that essentially any time that the mother starts moving, there is this sharp increase in the IBI. And of course, this is like a single case, but we replicated the study, of course, in several dyads in Japan, in Italy, in North America, and in different countries, and we found like always a consistent pattern. Okay, yes, and this consistent pattern. So the first report that we published in Canon Biology about 10 years ago now, almost 11 years ago. The, the first report was on 27 participants, and we showed like a decrease in the movement, a decrease in vocalization, distress vocalization, and a very sharp increase in the IBI. And since then, as I was telling, we have replicated in hundreds of kids, always showing the same pattern. And more recently, we published another study on current biology, where this time we were not focusing on the short response after the cry, but we were focusing on the best way to put the baby asleep. And I don't know if there are any new parents in the audience, or maybe it would be useful for some of you when you will become a leader. But we found using also predictive modeling that the best way to put the baby to cry is then when the baby was crying hard to walk for 5 minutes, but after the walking to wait 5 to 8 minutes before laying down. So it's like you need like a very strong initial parasympathetic stimulation, but then you need like some time for the sympathetic stimulation to increase, and then only after like this several minutes of waiting, you should lay down the baby so it will stay asleep. But is the transport effective only in humans? Well, in reality, if you're familiar with the other mammalian species, for example, if you have like a kitten at home or even a rabbit, you know that also the animals, when are transported, they have a very strong calming response. For example, it's very common to see kitten at home, then when they are transported by the nape of the neck, they relax. And we believe that the physiological response behind the maternal transport, it's quite similar. Of course, the body shape is different, so the position and the shape of the body is very different in the response, but the physiological mechanism should be conserved. So this should be like a very, very old and ancient response. Here, for example, is a study we conducted in Japan in marmosets, and young marmosets are very similar to human babies, and they tend to cry when they are isolated. Here you will see in the small cage like the baby marmoset, and now I will play the video and you will listen to like a very high pitch sound, which is like the baby cry. In the background you will see the mother that as soon as they open the cage, she will go and try to retrieve the pup. So as you can see clearly, even the marmoset, the young marmoset, respond to the maternal taking. And if you are interested, we just published like few weeks ago an article on communication biology where we were studying like the different level of attachment of in the marmosets family and how these translate in different behavior and in different brain structures. And of course, if you're interested, I later on I can send you the PDF for the study. But as I was telling you, it's not only something common in primates, it's also something common in other mammalians. So for example, this is like a lion cub. And as you probably know, lions are very territorial. They walk a lot, and they usually work in very different and large spaces. And so when the mother need to move around with a cub, in order to be fast, they usually transport the cub, and the cub take a specific response that you can see from this video. See, the cub relax and made the job of a mother to be transported much, much easier. So at the time I was working in Japan, we wanted to study lions, but lions are not very common in Japan, and also lionesses are not very famous to be very kind with scientists and researchers. So we decided to study mouse, and what we did, we essentially standardized a procedure that we call the pup in the cup. So within the cage, what we did was we placed a cup, a plastic cup, and within the cup, we placed it like pups. And essentially the mother, it's usually very anxious. She wanna have the pups next to her. So what she does was she tried to go inside the cup and try to retrieve the pup. But the story is that the cup, it's not very easy to navigate. So in order for the mother to succeed, especially when the pup become bigger, it's only if the mother is helping her. So this is a mother pup, the mother mouse, and she's trying to retrieve the pup. And the only way she has to succeed is if the pup gets like a specific response. And we did like several experiments. So we also use like different experimental setup. In one setup is like the maternal transport, but also we did like a manual transport where an experimenter was imitating the maternal transport. And in the second task, we were able to measure ECG. And to give you an example, this is like an example of transport, manual transport of postnatal day 18. Postnatal day 18 is also almost like an adult. Indeed, if you measure the immobilization time, which is on the y-axis here, you will see that the immobilization time is very short. So essentially, they struggle because they are like adults. They cannot really be like old. But if you do the same task to a postnatal day 12, and what you will see is that they can be very immobile. So essentially, they can stay like for all our task, which was 15 seconds, immobile. And why does it happen? Well, we believe that holding this position, it's very useful for the maternal transport. And this is a phase, a postnatal day 12, when they are not yet independent because their eyes are still closed and they are still like 1 week away from winning. So they are not independent. They depend from their mother, but they are also very big compared to their mother because the body size is about 40% of their mother. So in order to be helped, they need to help their mother. And indeed, if you see this response a very specific trajectory. And this trajectory is that at the beginning, during the first postnatal day, it's not very relevant, but as soon as the pup become more independent, which happen toward postnatal day 15, 17, and 18, the response decrease. But also during the task, we also found that during the crowning, like the human baby, the pups decrease their ultrasound vocalization, so they cry less. And also, the part that was more interesting for me was that they also show a physiological response that was very similar to the human baby. And so some interim conclusion is that this response is common. So you have like a decrease in movement, a decrease in crying, and an increase in the IBI. But we don't know what are like the sensorial input required and the neuromechanism. So I don't want to go too much in detail of the drug and pharmacological manipulation, but just let me tell you that in one study, what we did was like we blocked using lidocaine the sensitivity of the pulp on the tip of the neck. So essentially, this pulp that were injected in this location could not really feel what we call the maternal touch. And what happened in this pup is that their immobilization drastically decreased. So essentially, it's like, baby, you need to bring them using the maternal touch, otherwise they continue crying. And in another study, we studied like the sensor requirement, and we did like different study either using like vestibular stimulation or proprioception disruption, and we found that if the most important system, it's not the vestibular, but it's like the proprioceptive. Indeed, if you destroy the proprioceptive system using pyridoxine, there is a decrease in the immobilization. And again, I'm going a little bit fast on this, just to show you that even doing like manipulation, pharmacological manipulation, we found that of the different branch of the autonomic nervous system, it seems that the most important is the one related to the parasympathetic nervous system. So it seems that in order to have the calming effect, you need to have like an increase of the parasympathetic nervous system. And also we worked on some mutants, and we showed that in mutants that were carrying like cerebellar anomalies, they were kind of not showing the response. And see, and this also was replicated with the surgical emotion of the cerebellum. And so to summarize this part, we found that in order to have like a calming response, you need a complex interaction between some specific input like proprioception and tactile stimulation. So the maternal touch, as well as the fact that the baby or the pups feel that it's being lifted. And this produces like a response at different level, specifically at the level of the brainstem, of the parasympathetic activation, and on the cerebellum. But what is like the functional significance of this? Why is this important, if it's important? Well, we think it's important because we show that if you do this task and the mother cannot really count on the help from the papa, essentially, if they are to rescue the papa, it takes almost twice as long as for pap that respond. So imagine that there is like a dangerous situation and the mother need to move all the pups from one place to the other. Well, if a pup is moving, these pups will take much longer to be relocated. And this as a survival strategy, it's not very strong because it means that there is more danger for both the mother and the pup. But also we found in general in 3 different species was that using something which is similar to what is described in the theory of attachment, like the separation or the reunion, you see a very strong decrease of the distress score, or we can even call them cry, during the separation, from the separation to the reunion. So essentially when there is like a reunion, there is much less cry. Then let's move to something a little bit more recent, study that we're conducting within the past 5 years. And so we show that the mother responds automatically to the child and the child responds automatically to the baby. But can we say that mother and child are synchronized? In order to study synchrony, first of all, we need to define synchrony. Let me put this in a very simple way. If we have a like true stream of data, and this true stream of data comes from one from the mother and one from the baby, is these true streams of data are following a same pattern, a same spatial and temporal pattern, we can say that there is like high synchrony. On the other hand, if there is like, if they are following different pattern or opposite pattern, we can say that these is like no synchrony. So in this short video here, you can say that in the first part, the two stream of data going in a similar pattern and you see an increase of the synchrony, but in the second part, you see like the data going in different direction, and so you see a decrease in the synchrony. And what we did in these different studies was that essentially we were showing video to mother and child together, and in this study we show video to kids from 3 to 4 years old, and we were using like the functional near-infrared spectroscopy to study different areas of the brain. And what we did, essentially we recorded the activity when they were watching like videos, and we measure different things. We measure like the synchrony between mother and their own baby, and we call this real dyads and real signal. But then we also measure like something that we call video synchrony, because remember, all the kids and the mother, they are all watching the same videos. So we can even take like one mother from one dyad and the data of one baby from another dyad and check if there is synchrony. If there is synchrony at this level, we call video synchrony, because it means that the two brains are synchronizing with the video, but not necessarily are synchronizing each other. So when we have like co-present synchrony, you will see something in yellow, but when you have video synchrony, you see something in blue. And then we also have like a tiered kind of measurement. When we do, it's like we slightly modify using some algorithm the mother and baby signal. And if these signals are synchronized, it means that essentially what we are measuring is noise. So if in the next slide you will see like something red, it means that our study was not really successful. In reality, what we found was that there is, looking at different videos, you have different degrees of yellow and blue, and these different degrees at the beginning were very complicated to find. We could not really see why sometimes you have like more synchrony related to the video, and sometimes you have more synchrony related to the co-presence, so within the specific dyad, mother and child. And then what we did was that we did like an assessment of the emotional valence of the video, and we found that when in the video there is more emotional valence, there is more co-present synchrony. So it means that if you're going to see a movie with something which is not very relevant to you, and the movie it's kind of emotional neutral, that's fine. But if you want to focus on something which is want to see something emotionally very salient, you have more synchrony with people you can. But let me move kind of fast on the next point, and I ask Carola to interrupt me if I'm taking too much time. So let's focus on the stress and anxiety and see how this affect X synchronization. In a first study, we found that the analysis of parental stress has an effect on the synchrony, and more in general, more specifically on the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex on the left side. And what we found was that higher level of synchrony are inversely correlated with parental stress. So dyads where the parents were less stressed also had more synchrony. And similarly, we found that there was like an association between maternal anxiety and the mother-child brain-to-brain synchrony, in the direction that more anxiety was predictive or less synchrony. And we believe that this has some implication for child development. Because, for example, we believe that if there is like too much stress or too much parental anxiety, this has an effect on the synchrony, on the interbrain synchrony, and this has an effect on the mechanism of development of the child. And now let's go to the final question, which I think is also the most difficult, probably, which is which one is the best way to measure synchrony. And here I will show you a short video of tango dancers, which I not necessarily studied the brain-to-brain synchrony in tango dancers, but I think it's very illustrative and can explain you some difficulty we have when we measure synchrony. So essentially, when we look at different dyads that are interacting, we first of all need to decide on which level we want to focus. Then we want to also decide what do we mean for synchrony, because synchrony can be something that happens within 20 milliseconds or something that happened within 5 seconds or more. It can even be something that happened within hours. So, for example, if you look at cortisol responses, they can take much longer than seconds to see. But for example, looking at like a brain activation, in this study, together with Andrea Bizzego, which is a bioengineering working with us, we focus on using the same data, the same analysis, but just applying different synchronization algorithm, specifically cross-correlation, mutual information, wavelet coherence, and dynamic time warping, and using different lags. So lag 0 means what's happening at the same time, and then lag 1 is what happened when participant 1 is doing something to the brain of the other participant 1 second after, and then lag 2 seconds after, and lag 5 seconds after. And even without going into detail, but just looking at the 4 different clusters of the brain, you see that you have like different pattern of activation at different time and in different areas. So what can we do? Well, our suggestion is that, first of all, we should not really rely on single lab studies, but we should focus on data that are collected and analyzed from different labs, hopefully in different parts of the world. And one point to start is, first of all, to share data. And as a policy in our lab, from like since the past few years, we have decided that all the data that we collect are shared publicly and are available for everyone to use. So what are like the most important message so far? Well, we show that mother and also father automatically respond to the baby. The baby automatically respond to the mothers and the fathers, and then mother and fathers are synchronized with the child. Stress and anxiety affect synchrony, and we still don't really know yet what's the best way to measure synchrony. But the nice thing about using this kind of paradigm is also that you can focus on different kind of diets. So, for example, we have done studies on romantic diets. So, for example, showing different video, different emotional contents in diets that were like a different level of matching and happiness, and we found the level of we found that the level of synchrony was somehow predicting the level of happiness in the relationship. So higher level of synchrony means that somehow we're connected with the level of function in the couple. The one interesting thing about this data is that when we try to replicate this study was conducted in Singapore. When I was still working in Singapore a few years ago, we tried to replicate this data in Italy, and for the Italian data, we found a couple that was showing very low level of synchrony, and few weeks later, we had like a follow-up from the couple, and they were not a couple anymore. So essentially, we were able to predict the fact that they were not really functioning well, only looking at the brain response during the fact that when they were watching videos. Another application that we are currently doing is we are doing like role playing, which is often used in clinical settings, and we have like participant doing like role playing or universal role playing while wearing like the near scarf. You can see in this image like the setting. And without going too much into the detail, but what we found was that some measure needed to attachment, like the empathic preoccupation or the change of perspective taking, were highly correlated with synchrony level. And then most frequently, more recently, another thing that we are doing is like we're doing a conversation analysis, and we are seeing if the conversation that happened during the interaction in different dyads, either the emotional contents or the semantic structure can predict synchrony. And we have submitted this study, it's under review at the moment, but essentially to give you like some highlights of the study, we found that both emotional contents and semantic structure, if you combine this information and you use machine learning to predict, you can be able to predict brain synchrony. And then what's the next step? What are we doing next? And I know that you are students of a PhD program. As Canona was saying at the beginning, I'm also the chair of our PhD program, and maybe we can find some of you interested in visiting us for some time and doing some study together. But the focus that we have at the moment is we are focused on the mother-infant interaction, and we have seen how this impact the individual and dyadic interaction. We are now focusing on the group level, and even more importantly, we are interested in a more cross-cultural perspective. And so, for example, on this level, we are studying the attachment and early interaction in different samples. We are different collaborators even in South America. Some also from Chile, and maybe some of you is interested in participating in the study or is interested in collaborating with us. We are a very open group, so we are very open, and we invite any of you if you want to join to work with us. Here you have the QR code to the questionnaire, but also if you are interested, feel free to contact me. And with this, I am at the end of my presentation, and I want to thank all of you for listening and for attending. And of course, now there is time for questions.
Molto grazie, Gianluca. Vamos a dar espacio a las preguntas. Por ahora tengo solo 2 preguntas, pero vamos a ver si surgen algunas más. Voy a hacer la pregunta en español. Si te queda alguna duda, me dices, ¿ya? En primera instancia, Cristian Ángel, quien realiza la pregunta, agradece la presentación y hace una pregunta sobre los primeros estudios, ¿no? Los primeros hallazgos, donde tú muestras cómo los adultos, las madres y padres o no responden a los niños. Y dice, ¿qué se está haciendo a nivel de investigación para poder diferenciar las investigaciones, lo que comparten padres y madres, para diferenciar si el efecto es el género, es el sexo biológico el que influye, o son los patrones culturales de crianza que hacen que las madres como el rol de género sea distinto del rol de género de los papás? ¿Mm?
Esta es una pregunta realmente interesante, interesantísima. I would say in Italian, interesantísima. Yo creo que no es tan simple. Let me switch to English before I say something wrong in Spanish. I don't think it's very easy to answer for different reasons. First of all, because we cannot really totally disambiguate the cultural from the cultural effect. Because of course, we believe in a society where there are a number of cultural norms. So you should have like a baby born in an island without any cultural influence, and we could test really that. What I can say is that for sure there is like, I think, a biological effect, because we found something even when measuring like LGBTQ community. We found that there is something about the biological sex which is relevant to the response. But of course, we also found that these are not cultural, because, for example, studies show that the automatic response are really mediated by the exposure to the kids. And the mother tend to respond more because usually they are more exposed to the kids. But if you, for example, have a homosexual couple with the men, so homosexual, that take care of very young kids, which is not very common, because even if they can adopt kids, usually it almost never happened, at least in Italy or in country where we were studying, to adopt kids when they are very, very young, 0 to 6 months. Usually they can adopt kids later, no? But in some of the neuroimaging studies that have been conducted in our university, we have found that if there is an exposure, even in homosexual couple, you start seeing a very automatic response. So in general, if I rely on the biological sex, so I'm not talking about gender identity, just the biological sex, what we found is that the new mothers tend to be the one that responds the most. Then the new fathers and the non-mothers tend to have like a middle level, and then the non-fathers are usually the worst. I'm not saying that they are not prepared. I'm saying that if you make a list, they are the worst. Of course, they also have some automatic response, but not as strong as the biological mother, the mothers in general, and the female more in general. But again, I think that a lot of this is based on exposure and culture. And again, I think it's very complicated to give a definite answers, because the two things are so embedded. You cannot totally take out the culture. Actually, if Christian Angel has some idea of how to respond to this, I would be very, very interested in knowing, and maybe even interested in doing some study. But the thing that I can tell is that we are very we pay a lot of attention to this question, because it's also very important. I don't know the situation in Chile, but in Italy there is a very big political debate whether or not you should allow, for example, homosexual couple to adopt kids. And you know, I think it's very complicated to answer. My personal opinion is yes, you should give the opportunity to adopt. And if you look at the behavioral study, the behavioral study say that kids tend to do very well from different perspective, emotional, cognitive, when they are raised in same biological sex couple. But at the moment, there are very, very limited study from the neurobiological point of view.
Gracias, Gianluca. La segunda pregunta de Cristian Ángel también dice, quisiera preguntar si consideran utilizar medidas de variabilidad en sus estudios de sincronía o qué opina de ello. Por ejemplo, variabilidad kármica.
Yes, so the heart rate variability is something that we've considered a lot, especially when we were doing a study in comparative physiology, because it's not very easy to do that kind of neuroimaging task in very young kids. And for example, if you want to do a comparative approach with mouse model or with marmoset model. Then we've also done a study on heart rate variability or variabilidad cardíaca in human diets. And we've seen like synchrony pattern. I should say that probably in the past 5 years, we decided to go more toward the neuroimaging pattern because we're the one that were not very well studied. In terms of heart rate variability, they've been like studying the past 15 to 20 years in the field. So we have some knowledge about that. But the hyperscanning neuroimaging, it's something that it's relatively new. So that's why we focus more on this, because there were no other evidences. But of course, I think that you can see a pattern of heart rate variability synchronization. There are studies that show that. There are also studies that show synchronization at the other level. So, for example, on the cortisol level, there is some synchrony between like mother and child. And also we've done like study using the assessment of a specific pancreatic enzymes, which is the salivary alpha amylase. And we found that that also for that there is like the level of synchrony.
Ok, gracias. Quizás, considerando que nos quedan unos minutitos, aprovechar y quizás hacer una pregunta más amplia que tiene que ver con algo que tú mencionabas al final sobre cuál es la mejor manera o cuál es el mejor momento para medir sincronía cerebral, ¿no? Hemos estado discutiendo acá en el equipo sobre no específicamente sobre la sincronía cerebral, pero sí sobre el concepto de sincronía, ya sea conductual, ¿no? Y en la idea de que nos hacemos la pregunta sobre, por ejemplo, madre e hijo o una pareja. Nos preguntamos, ¿es razonable pensar que padre e hijo ante una tarea, ver un video o una tarea distinta, se sincronicen inmediatamente? O sea, como que la sincronía es que en el mismo momento, en el mismo tiempo, deben estar en un estado similar. Nos preguntamos si efectivamente esto es posible, si eso es el ideal, pensando un poco en que a nivel conductual vemos que en general las diadas madre-hijo tienden a sincronizarse, pero después de un periodo se tienden a sincronizar. Y lo otro es si es, y una segunda pregunta también sobre el ideal, es si efectivamente es la sincronía el ideal, en el sentido de que ambos deben estar en el mismo como nivel, versus es mejor la complementariedad en algunos aspectos, ¿no? Como en el tango, ¿no? En el tango hay sincronía de movimiento, pero también hay complementariedad de movimiento. Cuando yo doy un pie, el otro tiene que dar el pie hacia el otro. O sea, esas discusiones que son de cómo concebir la sincronía, como que los resultados, los pocos estudios que nosotros hemos comenzado a hacer, no hemos tenido resultados así como atractivos, o más, mejor dicho, no hemos encontrado lo que esperábamos, que es distinto. Pero nos ha hecho preguntarnos un poco estas nociones como de si la sincronía, el tiempo de la sincronía, y si efectivamente la sincronía como concebirla como estado igual versus complementario. No sé si puedes como discutir o conversar un poco de cuáles han sido las conversaciones de ustedes al respecto.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Well, those 2 points I think are really challenging and also very, very interesting. I think that's like those related to the most key points when you study, I believe, social interaction and synchrony. I do, well, let's start with the first one. What does it mean right now? The right now, well, I don't think we have any technique where we can study really the right now. Because, for example, if we use FNIRS, we are studying like the board signal, and the board signal takes to reach the peak 7 to 10 seconds. So we try something that happened at the same time, And we assume that it's happening at the same time, but we don't really know if it's happening exactly at the same time. But honestly, I think that's important, but I don't think that's too important, because I think what is important is also to understand if it's good or not to have synchrony. We don't really know if it's good or not. In my opinion, I believe that if we have like some good amount of synchrony during some specific time, that's okay. We don't need to have synchrony all the time. Synchrony all the time means people are crazy. And if people never have synchrony, it means also that people have probably something that it's not really functioning. And also, I think that sometimes we need to synchronize between people, no? And sometimes we need people to synchronize with something external. So sometimes we need two people to synchronize and have exactly the same pattern. So for example, if we are in the same room and a lion is attacking us, we need to be synchronized. We need to think exactly the same thing, otherwise we will be dead. At the same time, if we are doing something together, we don't want to exactly be synchronized, but we want to be synchronized in a complementary way. So I don't think we have yet a way to kind of disambiguate between these different levels of synchrony. And I think we have now approaching and having different algorithm that focus on different aspects, but still I mean, this field, it's still like a neonat. It's still a newborn. It's probably less than 10 years old. Well, probably the hyperscanning itself, it's just 5 or 6 years old. I mean, and now we are still discussing about, not still, we still need like to start a serious conversation about the standards. Devices and methods in EEG, they are like 100 years old. There are several way of analyzing the data that are structured and standardized, but fMRI, it's like 20 and 30 years old, and still we are like we have consensus, but for the NIRS, we don't yet have that consensus. So we still need the consensus, but at the same at the same time, I think that the FNIRS is a very good device if you want to study synchrony in mother and child, or in parents and child, because it gives you the possibility to have like a more naturalistic setup.
Ok, muchas gracias, Gianluca. Le acabamos de preguntar a nuestros asistentes por alguna pregunta más. Queremos aprovechar hasta el último minuto, pero parece que no tenemos más preguntas. Voy a dar un minuto más por si hay alguna pregunta. En este minuto, por mientras, voy a aprovechar de agradecer a Gianluca por su presentación, por unirse con nosotros, pese a las 6 horas de diferencia que hay entre Chile y Italia. Así que muy agradecida por tu presentación, nuevamente muy entretenida. Cada vez que escucho tus presentaciones quedo más entusiasmada con lo que ustedes hacen allá en la universidad. Así que darte muchas gracias a ti, a los oyentes que están aquí dando las gracias por el chat. Muchísimas gracias, que ha sido muy entretenido, muy interesante, muchas gracias. Así que solo desearte que 2 nuevos mensajes más. Muchas gracias, muchísimas gracias. Excelente presentación, demasiado interesante, dice alguien. Muchas felicitaciones a Gianluca. Así que darte nuevamente las gracias, bueno, y esperar
Carola,
que... Sí,
tenemos
sí.
una pregunta de Luz María
Una
en el chat.
pregunta, alguien, ya, perfecto. A ver, aprovechemos la última. ¿Qué dice?
Ella dice, muchas gracias por tu presentación. En tu opinión, entonces, ¿la sincronía debiese ser muy sincrónica ante una amenaza, pero sería suficiente con que esa sincronía sea como complementaria en situaciones más cotidianas.
Mhm. Ante una amenaza, I mean,
Amenaza,
Amenaza.
amenaza, amenaza vital. Vital, I look for the word. Amenaza, amenaza.
The threat.
Ah,
When you are on threat or when you are in danger.
I see, I see, I see. Okay,
pericolo,
okay, okay. Oh yeah,
pericolo di
amenazza. Oh,
vita. Pericolo di
amenazza.
vita.
That's like Italian. It's
Yeah,
minaccia.
yeah.
Una minaccia.
Pericolo,
Yeah, yeah. It's
una
my bad, my bad.
pericolo di vida.
Yes. I think it depends. I think it depends. I think there are some situation where synchrony needs to be like doing the same thing and thinking the same thing, and sometimes it needs to be complementary approach. But I also think that this exchange need to be very, very fast. Because, for example, let's go back to La Amenaza, when you have like the lion in the room, and then at the beginning, you first need to be, you freeze and you need to realize what's happening. And in that case, you need to be synchronic. But then you need to act and you need to do something. And maybe when you are doing something, you need to be complementary. So I think this situation changed much, much more rapidly than we expect. I don't expect that synchrony. For example, if you look at the behavioral data of 10 or 15 years ago, they were showing that synchrony, it's more like a state. Like it's something that start and finish like minutes later. I think it's more like a continuous of event which change very, very fast. And thanks, Maria Silva, for the question.
Ok, perfecto.
Ok.
There
Entonces
is another
nos
question.
quedamos,
Otra
Gianluca,
pregunta.
otra más.
Sí,
Mira,
tenemos.
al final se motivaron. Dice, gracias, molto interessante. Sí, efectivamente, cuando nace un bebé, principalmente bebés prematuros, dado el tiempo de hospitalización que poseen, cuando existe acompañamiento amoroso, se produce segurización corporal y posibilita que tantos hombres como mujeres puedan desarrollar esta sincronía emocional temprana. Esto me parece más bien un comentario que una pregunta, ¿no? Como la idea de que los bebés prematuros, a ver, voy a buscar cómo se dice bebé prematuro.
No, I
Ah,
understand the question.
ok.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting this point. And
Mm,
if I may add, I think also the time for developing this attachment, it's different.
mm,
Because if we talk about, let's talk about biological mothers, then it's really different for adoptive mothers. But for biological mothers, there is like a time when the baby is already in the body, and when there is like a very big change from the hormonal, physiological, and even brain functioning. So the mother, essentially the mother become a mother from the very beginning. The father also changed during pregnancy, but it started to change more drastically after the birth of the baby. So of course, there is some adjustment time, but this adjustment time has different timings. And on this, I mean, it's unavoidable, like it's the different biology, there is nothing that you can see. But what is very important is exposure. Because, for example, we know that fathers that spend more time with the new mother during the pregnancy, they become slightly more attached after birth and sooner. But I think this is probably related to a general exposure phenomenon. Like when you are exposed to something, you become more attached and also more emotionally involved. So yes, thanks a lot for the question. And yes, I believe it's important to have like some time for adjustment. And even like there are some specific conditions where this time for adjustment change. So for example, the example of the preterm, it's very important because especially sometimes preterm, especially for the very early preterm, they need to spend some time in ICU. And so there are like a number of things that this protocol are trying to do to increase the contact. For example, a lot of the study, mostly these studies were conducting in Northern Europe, like in Finland and in Sweden, but they did many protocols on the increasing skin-to-skin contact. So in order to increase the contact on the newborn, especially for the preterm, they were doing a lot of skin-to-skin contact afterwards. And this has an effect on the hormonal and also physiological well-being of the kids and also of the parents.
Bueno, acá nosotros, no sé si están entre los asistentes, pero hay un par de colegas nuestros acá interesados sobre todo en bebés pretérmino que pasan por periodo de hospitalización, términos con bebés que nacen muy temprano con muy bajo peso, así que en una de esas algunos se motivan por... Yo creo que aquí es más que nada un campo aún muy poco explorado, ¿no? Como estos procesos que son de cuidados médicos pueden impactar o no en la dificultad o en la facilidad con que las vías madre o padre e hijo logran sincronizarse para el bienestar de ambos. Bueno, ya como siempre se nos pasó la hora. Queremos ser respetuosos con el tiempo de Gianluca, así que le damos nuevamente las gracias y esperamos seguir en contacto, Gianluca, ahí por mail, y espero que nos podamos ver en diciembre cuando vienes al Congreso. Así que ahí nos vemos personalmente, de todas maneras.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Gianluca.
Gracias per
Ya,
l'invitazione. Il mio correo elettronico è in webinar chat. Soy uno estudiante, sono profesores desean escribirme. Estaría muy feliz.
ok, ahí está, lo pueden buscar y si es que alguien lo pierde de los asistentes nos puede escribir y para pedirnos su mail, ya que Gianluca lo puso ahí en forma abierta.
Por si
¿Mm?
acaso, ya mandé un correíto a todos los participantes en este coloquio con el correo de Gianluca,
Ah,
también con
perfecto.
el link de acceso a los coloquios, tanto a este que ha sido grabado como a otros que vamos a realizar a lo largo del año. Así que muchas gracias a todos, muchas gracias Gianluca, muchas gracias Carola y a todos los invitados. Igual nos estaremos viendo. Cuídense. Hasta
Chao,
Gracias.
chao.
luego.
Ciao, 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 ciao.